All right, welcome back. So we've seen our first couple of tiny minor components. We're now going to look at a much larger application. This is actually something we build later in the course. It's one of our big projects. And I want to break down some of the components. So not all of them. Again, don't worry about the code. Just focus over here in my editor. Each one of these files is an individual component that this app uses. So we have some pretty standard ones like a nav bar right there. If we go to one of these palettes, like this one here, there is a nav bar. So this is one version of the nav bar. But also, if I go and click on one of these boxes, and I click on more, how about this purple shade? Here's our nav bar, but notice it changed slightly. It doesn't have that color slider anymore. This went away. So it is not just some static HTML and CSS. It decides what to display depending on basically what we tell it to do. So it's a modular, reusable piece, but it's not always exactly the same. Same thing here. Each one of these is a component called color box right here. So this is a color box, this is one, and they all behave the same way, but they all display a different background color, first of all, a different name, and the same button there. But each button is going to take you somewhere else. If I click on this green color, I see all of the green shades. If I click on this, what is it called? Very berry, I see all the very berry shades. So they all work in the same way. They're all modular, small fragments of an application that are reusable. These are actually color boxes as well. They're a different size, but it's the exact same component. We just told it to be bigger, to take up more space. Another example, there is a component around this called palette. So there is a palette component, there is a navbar component, there's a footer component also. I forgot to show that one. Here you can see we're using the same footer. Now if we go back to the home page, if we go to create palette, we have a couple new components. We have a different navbar component. We have a drawer component. Inside of this drawer, we have a form component. I think it's called color picker form right here. So all of this code makes this form. And actually within this form, I believe we're using some other components. We're using a button component. We're using the actual color picker here. This is its own standalone component. Then we have these boxes, and they're not quite the same as a regular color box as we saw earlier because they are draggable. We can drag and drop, we can delete. So this is a slightly different component called draggable color box. So we have all of these components interacting, living in harmony together. I also forgot to point this out. Each one of these is a component called mini palette. So our application has been broken up into a bunch of smaller pieces, and often we reuse these pieces. Sometimes we don't, but usually we make them in a way that they're modular. We can pass in slightly different information. For example, the nav bar, I could pass in some information that says, show me this slider, and on this page, hide the slider. Or for color box, make a red background, and then the next one should be green. Or this one should be green, but twice as tall. So I just wanted to show you that components are a real thing. We use them all the time, and they can get quite small. For example, one of these color boxes, and within this, there's a couple of other components. This copy button, when I click, let me zoom out. When I click here, this is its own component as well. That's showing for a second and then going away. So that was very quick. I just wanted to show you something slightly more substantial so you didn't think it was all about stars and ratings. These are some more realistic examples as far as the number of components we have. And this isn't even a terribly huge app. It's pretty large for a course, an online course, but some React apps, some production apps could have hundreds and hundreds of components. All right, so next we're going to dive into defining our own component. First, we have to get a little tool up and running for our server. Then we'll write our own component. We'll talk about functional components versus class-based components, and then we'll really get going with the course. All right, so we're on the cusp of creating our very first component from scratch, but unfortunately there's one minor thing we have to get out of the way first, which is we need to have a way of serving our file, serving our directory. Later on, we won't need to worry about this. We're going to use a much more complicated tool called Create React App, which takes care of a lot of stuff for you. It sets you up with a bunch of files and directories and a server. But for now, we're doing React sort of the old-fashioned way. We'll make a single HTML file. We'll add in a script manually. But in order to make everything work, we have to have a server. So there's two options I'm going to show you. If you already have a way of serving a directory that you're comfortable with, then you can skip this. The one that I'm going to start with is built into my text editor. So I'm using VS Code, Visual Studio Code. It's free, it's great. I'll do a separate video on the extensions I recommend as far as React, when we're talking about React snippets, ES7 snippets, that sort of thing. But if you want, you can download this. It looks like this, although I have changed some of the colors and all of that. So basically, there is an extension called Live Server. So if I have a file like index.html, and I add some HTML in here, I'll just say hello, and let's add an H1 and just put gibberish in there. If I want to open this as a file, I could just double click on the file name, open it in the browser, but that's over the file protocol. I want this to be served on my local host. So I have an extension I've included, which is called, where are you? Live Server. Almost there. Here we go. So I already have it installed, but all you have to do is click down here, extension, type in live server, and you would click the green button to install it. So once it's installed, I'll go ahead and just uninstall it just to show you. Click install, then you'll need to make sure that you actually have a directory open. So if you've never worked with VS Code, if we make a brand new window here, there's two options, open a folder, new file. We'll click open folder and then navigate to a folder someplace where you're going to create your code. So once you've done that, which is what I have over here, I'm looking at a folder called first component, and it has two files in it. I'm going to right click on this, open with live server, and it will open up in my browser. There we go. And notice the URL. This is a server running on localhost. And if I change something in here, like change that to hi, and I save, go back, I don't have to refresh, it's automatically updated. So this is one option for running a server. The other option is to do it using the command line. And there's actually more than one option, but the one I'm going to show you is using Python to start a simple server. And before I forget to stop the server, you can right click, stop. Okay, so the other option through the command line looks like this. You open up the command line, navigate to the directory. In this case, this is the file and the directory I'm trying to access. I want to start a server here. So I'm going to type Python 3, and if you don't have Python 3, I believe this should work with just Python as well. Python 3-m and then http.server, and then hit enter. And it starts this up, and it tells you the port, and you can just copy and paste this URL. So let's now visit that URL, and we see the exact same thing. I have my file served here. So you'll see why this is important, why we need a server in the next video. It has to do with something called Babel. But you need to make sure, if you are going to follow along, you need to make sure that you have one of these options working, or another way of starting up a server. There's tons and tons. You can do it through a Ruby command in the command line. There's other extensions. There's a lot of options. So make sure that you can do this before we move on.